because the church is universal, and the church remains universal until the end of until Christ our Lord comes again to judge the living and the dead. Even if the church should seemingly disappear underground, it remains the Catholic Church.
What do you think Father Gruner would make of the situation in the church today?
Well, I talked with him many times about what's happening in the church. So, and he agreed with me totally. In fact, the reason why I ended up writing these 2 volumes on papal heresy, and then specifically on the question of the heresy of Jorge Bergoglio, and the question of the supposed resignation of Pope Benedict XVI, it was at Father Gruner's request, of course, that I wrote these 2 volumes, because he said that what I had to say on this topic is very urgently needs to be said. So I did 5 years of work to get these 2 volumes written, and as it turns out, I have written now what is the most comprehensive work, a theological analysis of the question, a theological examination of the question of papal heresy and its application. Other ecclesiastical writers, even doctors of the church, have written in their volumes. They might devote a chapter to this question, but I've written 1,300 pages on the question of papal heresy. And I made an in-depth theological analysis of that question. And in the history of the church, no one else has written so comprehensively a work on that topic as I have. So I think it is an important contribution that I've made to Catholic theology in these my latest two books, these 2 volumes.
Yeah, I'll bring that one back up on the screen here to remind our viewers on the case on the true and the false pope, the case against Bergoglio. So this was 2021, whilst Bergoglio was alive. And then the 2019 version was to deceive the elect. And these are not short by any means, 676 pages for this one, and 642. If maybe you could summarize in a brief manner, what is the contribution you have made? In other words, what are you saying in these 2 volumes that maybe the layperson who doesn't have time to read 600 pages, could you sort of synthesize that for us as briefly as possible?
Well, there are many misconceptions about the question of papal heresy. Can a pope be a heretic? Yes or no? If a man who, hypothetically, if a man were a pope, and if he were to fall into heresy, would he cease to be pope? These kinds of questions, I believe that I have really provided a definitive answer, theologically conclusive answers to these questions. Mm-hmm. How does one judge if a man who is considered to be pope, what the theologians would call a putative pope, mm-hmm. one who is thought to be pope, but is not certainly pope, how does one judge such a man? Of course, a true and valid pope cannot be judged by anyone. That's against the dogma of the faith, even to make that assertion that a true and valid pope can be judged by the church. Mm-hmm. And there have been authors who have been coming up with this, regurgitating this long discredited doctrine, which since the First Vatican Council, it would be, strictly speaking, is a heresy to say that. Mm. And I remember in my student days in Rome, one of our professors of dogmatic theology, one of the Dominicans at the Angelicum, was asked that question about deposing a pope. He says, "Haven't you heard? It's a matter of faith. A pope cannot be deposed. A pope cannot be removed from office.
A heretic presumably could be recognized as a heretic, and then the conclave of cardinals or a council could elect somebody else. Is that how it works?"
Ultimately, that's how it works. But the clue is given to us already in the Council of Constance. That was an ecumenical council. The earliest sessions are not included as ecumenical, so don't have the status of being an ecumenical council, like the fourth session, for example. But the ones that deal with this question on papal heresy specifically in the 37th session. The 37th session dealt with the supposed papacy of anti-pope. I'm trying to think of his name. Benedict the 13th, I think it was the name he went by. That was Pedro de Luna. And the council decreed that by his heresy and schism, that he by himself had forfeited any ecclesiastical office he has ever held, any ecclesiastical dignity.
Was it private heresy? Where did he pronounce his? Because there's a debate today. It's over the question. I think is well, some people will say, Bergoglio or even Leo, are they material heretics, formal heretics? Are they publicly imposing their ideology, which obviously they are? But in this case, was that particular anti-pope a personal heretic, or what was the situation there?
Personal heretic, yes. It doesn't matter if a man is imposing his heresy or if he is simply asserting the heresy. The criteria for judging a person a heretic, it's the same for every Catholic in the world, whether you're supposedly a pope or if you're a street sweeper. It's the same rules that apply, which is if you are verified to be a formal heretic, then you are incapable of holding ecclesiastical office. Once it is verified, and what happened in the case of Pedro de Luna, the legates from the Council of Constance questioned him, gave him warnings, and he remained hardened in his heresy and schism, denying effectively the dogma of the Catholicity of the Church, because he said that the council, that's not the church. The church is here in Paniscola. That's a little place in Spain where he had his headquarters. And that the whole Catholic Church was reduced to being just there in that one little locality, Paniscola. And he thumped on the armrest of his supposed papal throne, and he said, "This is the Ark of Noah." This. So he's saying this is the Catholic Church here in Paniscola, and the rest of the church, all the bishops have defected. And he was judged on that point to have denied the Catholicity of the Church, because the Church is universal, and the Church remains universal until the end of until Christ our Lord comes again to judge the living and the dead. Even if the Church should seemingly disappear underground, it remains the Catholic Church, and there will be Catholics all over the world, even if they might not be so easy to find them and to locate them and to identify them for obvious reasons, because during time of severe persecution, it could cost them their lives, and that has actually been the case during the Roman persecutions, and the persecution that will soon be afflicting the church is going to be even worse than in the Roman times. Yeah. And we're on the verge of that breaking out very soon.
Yeah, so, I'd like to ask two questions on that particular topic there. One is what you just said about the need to verify someone as a formal heretic. But of course, now today, the hierarchy is complicit in the errors of the modernist council. So really, you can't count on them to verify or warn
no, you can't.
Bergoglio or Leo to warn him. Yes. You're saying they can, or they would in some way, or?
Well, in the case of Bergoglio, there was a very publicly made correction.
The dubia, is that what you're referring to?
There was a dubia, and after the dubia questions, there was an actual correction being made. Bishops, priests, theologians signed a declaration correcting his heresies and accusing him of heresy, and he just dismissed it, very contemptuously dismissed it, and he said that these people have psychological disorders. That was his response.
There was a number of statements put out. I know Cardinal Burke never delivered on his sort of fraternal correction that he had been saying, but you're absolutely right. Bergoglio was obstinate. How do you view then Leo's reign so far? Is that someone who's similar to Francis, or some are saying that Leo is sort of a hearkening back to the Benedict age, where he's dressing nice, looks conservative, but he's still speaking and continuing the Bergoglio revolution.
Yes, and Leo is much worse than Benedict. Benedict was a Vatican II man. That's bad enough, but he was only Vatican II. He was not, how should I say, a militant synodalist. And Leo is a militant synodalist.
Right.
And the question of, like I say, the question of heresy, it is simply a matter of, does the man make the assertions that qualify him as a formal heretic? And if he publicly makes the assertion, in canon law, to public heresy is not simply something, a published statement that the whole world can read. It can be that. But for example, if, as in the case of Pedro de Luna, his public heresy was spoken only before 2 legates. And in canon law, what that means is, if the statement is reasonable, it's potentially and reasonably going to be made public to the whole world. So even if today the assertion is made, the heresy is asserted before just a small number of people, if the very nature of that statement is such that it's going to get out to the whole world, that already qualifies as public heresy. And that's why Pedro de Luna was, from that moment, he was judged to be a public heretic. And the council said, for precautionary, as a precautionary measure only, the council declares him deposed, because he, by his heresy and by his schism, he deposed himself from any ecclesiastical office he may have held. Now, the great misconception among so many Catholics, and I hear this all the time, they're saying, well, if Leo, for example, like Bergoglio came out with a very clearly asserted formal heresy that is beyond all shadow of a doubt, fulfilling the criteria, the canonical indicia of formal heresy. He did it publicly, he did it explicitly, he did it in such a manner that there was absolutely no doubt whatever that he was aware that his assertions were against the Catholic faith itself. I'll give you one example. When he said, it is illicit to convince someone of your faith. That, in other words, to convince a person to become Catholic, he said, that is venom.
Right.
And he said, it is illicit. It's wrong to do it. So he's saying it's wrong to do it. Now, Jesus Christ our Lord solemnly commanded his apostles to make disciples of all nations, to teach them the Catholic faith, to teach them and baptize them, to use Bergoglio's word, to, as is the properly defined term, to proselytize the whole world, to go out to the unbelieving world, to all the people in the world who profess false religions, and to bring them into the church, to convince them of the faith, to baptize them so that they can save their souls. That's the Catholic teaching. That's the teaching of Jesus Christ. That is the perpetual dogma of the faith. And Bergoglio said, that is wrong, that is illicit, and that is venom. Now, that's saying that the doctrine of Jesus Christ himself is venom. It's clear the man was a heretic. Now, in canon law, and the ecclesiastical jurisprudence is much more clearly expressed in the 1917 Code of Canon Law. So even though the 1917 Code of Canon Law is not enforced as a statutory collection of canons, the canonical doctrine, the enshrinement of the jurisprudence of the Roman Church and the canonical tradition is so clearly set forth that it has that the academic value of that. Its value as a statement of Church's canonical doctrine. The canonical doctrine of the Church remains the same on these points, and so we look to the new Code of Canon Law. We don't see all these distinctions being so clearly made, because it was decided when they put together the new Code of Canon Law. They revised the Code of Canon Law in 1983. They didn't want to put all that stuff into the new code, because that refers to canonical doctrine, and there you go to the approved works of the great canonists, and you can study canonical doctrine. You already have canonical doctrine summed up, compendialized in the 1917 Code of Canon Law. There was no need to do that again in the 1983 Code.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't put those things into the 1983 Code, but it's still there. So, but to understand the canons, you got to go back and look at the 1917 Code. On heresy, there are two major divisions. There is the excommunication against heretics. For those who are certainly heretics, they are automatically excommunicated. End of story.
Mm-hmm.
For those who are publicly defecting from the Catholic faith, they, ipso facto, by the force of law itself, that is, without any judgment being made against them, without any declaration being made against them, they, by themselves, forfeit all office that they hold. That's simply putting into practice, that is simply putting into statutory law what was already declared by the Council of Constance way back in 1417.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have the clear-cut case of unmistakable, what the great theologians call manifest heresy, it's public heresy, it's manifest heresy. Such a person is by himself, has deposed himself from office, from any position of ecclesiastical office. He deposes himself from the highest to the lowest. And the second category is those who are suspect of heresy. Now, all this question of giving ecclesiastical warnings, ecclesiastical admonitions, the penal process, and the judgment of heresy, that refers to those who are under suspicion of heresy. There are degrees of suspicion. There is light suspicion. There is vehement suspicion. There is violent suspicion of heresy. And for those who are suspected of heresy, they are subjected to a penal process. Those who are the legitimate pastors of the church, the superiors, put their subjects into a penal process. And there you have the corrections. There you have the admonitions. That is done for those who are suspected of heresy, and it is done by their superiors. But for those who are public heretics, beyond all shadow of doubt, manifest, obvious, formal heretics, there's no need for a penal process according to canon law. They lose office by themselves, and it is simply declared by those who have the competency to make the declaration.
It's a very fascinating discussion, and I think an explanation, and thank you for that, because I think a lot of our viewers are looking for that sort of nuanced commentary, because it's sort of hard to come by right now. The thing it makes, I have a couple thoughts.
I need to add to that. This is just not my interpretation of the code.
Yes.
This division between those who are clearly and obviously, those who are manifestly formal heretics, they're excommunicated, and that can be recognized by anyone and judged by anyone. All of the most authoritative authors have explained this. For example, the one I quote was in the 1600s. Was a one who was a qualificator of the Holy Office, and one of the most authoritative works written on the prosecution of heretics and suspected heretics. How do you prosecute heretics and suspected heretics? And the book is neatly divided into chapters: those who are clearly heretics and those who are suspected of heresy, and how does the church go about adjudicating the cases of heretics. So
it's important.
This is settled doctrine. This is not Father Kramer's personal opinion.
Yes. The thought that comes to my mind then, because you mentioned how Francis was warning about proselytizing others, but it reminds me of, well, one, what we just saw at the Vatican with Nostra Aetate celebration, right? And that was Leo was there, and he was shaking hands with all the non-Catholics and non-believers, and Cardinal Koch was there telling the Jews that their covenant is still valid. And it reminds me of what that document actually says, but also about Unitatis Redintegratio. That's a council document on the church's relationship with Protestants. And I think you could say what Francis said there about don't proselytize, is that not implicit in what the council itself, and specifically Nostra Aetate and Unitatis Redintegratio, actually says implicitly? And if that is the case, then we do have proof that the council itself is basically telling the church, Catholics throughout the world, to not proselytize and to rather engage in dialogue. And if that is the case, then what we have after the council is that we have putative popes who are adhering to, at least in a certain sense, the heresy of, not the heresy that you yourself just said was apparent in Bergoglio's remarks. Because again, the mission, if you will, of the conciliar church post-Vatican II has not been to convert the world to the Catholic religion. It's been to engage in dialogue and have unity, visible unity. This is what John Paul and Benedict pursued. And so I'm thinking here about what you said about manifest heresy and public heresy, etc. It would almost seem then we sort of have to apply what you're saying about Bergoglio to the rest of the hierarchy, and that as long as they follow along with the council's teachings, then they are becoming heretics, objectively speaking, and it is becoming manifest, and that potentially, one day it will all have to be essentially canceled. What is your reaction to that? Because I think this is all very public. Modernism is a heresy. Ecumenism is against the faith, and if the council adopted that, then those who promote it and promulgated it are adhering to that heresy and are implicitly promoting it.
There are bishops and cardinals today who are so outlandish in the assertions they're making against the faith that there can be no doubt that they are in heresy and they are public heretics. They're outside of the church. But at the same time, we must exercise caution, because to be judged a heretic, there must be pertinacity. So there are many people who make the mistake. They hear a proposition that is materially against the faith, and they say, that person's a heretic, he's outside of the church, he's excommunicated himself. The assertion of a proposition which is in fact against the faith does not automatically qualify a person as being an obstinate, pertinacious heretic. To be contumacious, to be pertinacious, it has to be clear that the person is well aware and that his assertion is against the faith, and with full knowledge he asserts against the faith knowingly. In that case, then you know that the person is a formal heretic. But every time someone says something that is against the faith, or the way it's formulated, it might not always be that explicit, and the pertinacity might not be that explicit. The person could have some degree of ignorance. A person can have some misunderstanding of theology. And how many times you hear people say something, and unknowingly, unwittingly, they are speaking against the dogma of the faith, and they don't even know it. Others who think that the church's doctrine, it might not be an article of faith that they're dealing with, and yes, in fact, it is. Or they may be interpreting it wrongly. They may be interpreting in such a manner that is against the faith, but they don't think so. I remember I had a professor of moral theology when I was doing my licentiate degree, which unfortunately I didn't finish because of contaminated water. I was doing a licentiate in dogmatic theology, and there was a professor of moral theology who made assertions about original sin. And it was against the anathema, against a dogmatic canon of the Council of Trent. So I read the canon in Latin to him. And the professor took out his handkerchief and wipes his brow, and he says, "Anatemasit, anatemasit." Yeah. And he explained why he thought he was not going against the proper sense and meaning of that canon. So it can be tricky business at times, and the qualification of a statement, and not more than just a statement, the qualification of the person as a heretic. That's more difficult than what may first appear to be the case.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say it's apparent that Leo thinks he's promoting the Catholic religion. He's saying all these things that he believes and takes his bearings from the council. He's obviously seemingly unaware that what he's promoting is the Vatican II religion. And so objectively speaking, regardless if he's aware of it or not, he's promoting a sort of false religion, right? And if that's the case, it almost to me says, well, to make the distinction between formal, material, etc., manifest heresy, it almost seems like a moot point, because it is apparent that he's not promoting Catholicism. So in that case, how could he be the Pope, regardless if he's unaware or made a flippant statement here or there? Because he's saying this in his regular teaching vehicles, in his statements, in his letters, etc. Although he's obviously not invoking infallibility, but he's using the office for something contrary to that what it was set up to do.
In Catholic dogma, the papal infallibility extends to the ex cathedra statements, to the pronouncements of the extraordinary magisterium, which means to say the solemn definitions of a pope, together with the council or by himself ex cathedra. And when the pope, with a sufficient degree of definitive solemnity, even if it's not a solemn definition, if he is repeating what the church in the ordinary universal magisterium has been definitively taught and therefore infallibly taught down to the ages, then when the Pope, even in his ordinary magisterium, expresses that doctrine, which is the infallible universal ordinary magisterium of the church, then of course that is also infallible. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, if it's not in one of those categories, then the Pope is not infallible. And he could say something heretical. He could teach something heretical. And if he's a formal heretic, of course, then that would prove that he's not a legitimate pope, that he's not a valid pope. But you've had popes in history. John the 22nd, I think, is the textbook example of a pope who taught something that was against what was already the universal doctrine of the church. That those who have finished their purging in purgatory, who died in the state of grace, the church teaches that they are in heaven. That they are in heaven and they have the beatific vision. And this has been universally held, universally professed in the church down to the ages. You had sometimes some theologian here and there who might question it, but there was always a moral unanimity on that point since the earliest ages, since the patristic days, that whenever that question ever came up, there was no doubt about it. They're in heaven. They're enjoying their heavenly reward. The saints in heaven have their beatific vision. The saints already have their eternal life. It's theirs. But John the 22nd didn't think so. And he thought that it's not until after the final judgment that the souls of the blessed will gain the beatific vision. And he wanted to study the question, so he was not really, he wasn't an obstinate heretic. There was some subjective doubt in his mind. And this is what makes someone a material heretic rather than a formal heretic, is when there is that error in the mind, which is in the form of ignorance and doubt, an inculpable doubt, or at least not an obstinate doubt. You might say he should have known better, but in fact he didn't. And he was willing to study the question, and he appointed commissions to try to get to the bottom of the issue, because the king of France at the time threatened him with burning him at the stake as a heretic. The Pope. Mm-hmm. Had the Pope burned as a heretic on that question. So
now, did John the 23rd? Because the difference I would say is that I don't know all the details of the case, so excuse my ignorance. What seems to be unique though now is that the post-Vatican II popes are daily promoting things in their ordinary teaching on faith and morals in a positive manner that is contrary to the faith. Whereas I think the case of John the 22nd was he had doubts about this question. I don't know if he tried to bind the entire church in a formal statement or anything to believe that. Obviously, he wanted to study the question more privately, but he was not there giving statements saying, "Okay, Bishop X, Y, and Z of the entire world, you have to believe this." And that's the case of the post-Vatican II popes, is that they're out there just destroying what seems to me that is the indefectibility of the church, which means, again, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the church cannot err on faith and morals. Where in the case today, it is a minute-by-minute erring on faith and morals, given the death penalty, a lot of other issues that came out of the council, like religious indifferentism, religious liberty, etc. How would you respond to that? And again, I don't have all the details on John the 22nd, so excuse my ignorance.
What we see taking place today, unlike the case of John the 22nd, where you had a Catholic Pope who had difficulty on a point of theology, a point of doctrine, whereas what we have today is a large segment of the hierarchy defecting from the Catholic faith and becoming a counter church, a counterfeit church, a counter church, a counterfeit church, as I'm saying, so that it is not the Catholic Church. You have the synodal church, which is constituted synodally, and that's already a heresy. The Catholic Church is not synodally constituted, whereas Bergoglio said that during the synod, he actually came out and said that the synodality is essentially of the constitution of the church. That is heresy. The church, there are synods in the church. Throughout the whole history of the church, there have always been synods and councils. We don't deny that there was this aspect of synodality in the church, but it's only an aspect. It is not an essential characteristic, an essential attribute of the church's constitution, insofar as the church is constituted not synodally. The church is constituted hierarchically. Under the primacy of the Pope, which is solemnly defined by the First Vatican Council as a full and supreme jurisdiction, and that primacy consists of a total fullness of supreme power. Now, being a total fullness of supreme power, in the Vacantis Apostolicis Sedis, Pope Pius XII elaborated further on that, saying that this jurisdiction is an absolute jurisdiction over the entire church, and that is clear. The total fullness of supreme power over the entire church. This is solemnly defined by the First Vatican Council, and therefore the jurisdiction, all authority and jurisdiction that is anywhere in the church, in the bishops, that is hierarchically, that exists in hierarchical subordination to the absolute primacy of the Pope, the total fullness of supreme power. That is the Catholic dogma. That is the Catholic faith. That is irreformable. It is solemnly defined, and as such, being solemnly defined by the First Vatican Council, it is irreformable. The Church cannot abandon that absolute primacy, that total fullness of supreme power, and profess a different kind of primacy in the Pope. Whereas the synod, Bergoglio's synod, professed a different kind of primacy, a primacy that cannot be exercised unconditionally, but must be synodally exercised. And that means the Pope is under some strict obligation to listen to his subordinates and decide consultatively upon hearing his subordinates. That's heresy. Because the Pope has a total fullness of supreme power, it is entirely discretionary. The Pope has the authority, the full freedom to decide whether his subordinates merit to be heard or not. Mm-hmm. And if the Pope decides in his judgment that the bishops are wrong, the bishop conferences are wrong, even the cardinals are wrong, that he, as a successor of Peter, who is entrusted by Christ with that task to confirm the brethren in the faith, that is a duty that falls singularly on the Pope, because to him is given that power of the keys. Whatever he personally binds on earth is bound in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And his infallibility is a corollary pertaining essentially to that primacy. So whether it's a matter of discipline or whether it's a matter of dogma,
Mm-hmm.
The buck stops here at the papacy. As St. Augustine said, ubi Petrus, ibi ecclesia. Where Peter is, there is the church. And so at the end of the day, they can make all the consultation they want, but the Pope has that prerogative, that God-given jurisdiction to disregard or not, to consult or not consult with the hierarchy. And if he prudently decides that he has been given sufficient grace by God to make a decision by himself, he has the authority, the rightful authority, to exercise that power by himself. And he does not have to exercise it synodally. There is no conditionality attached. By divine law, there is no such conditionality attached to the exercise of the primacy. Whereas the final document of Bergoglio's synod says that not just the bishop, but even the primacy must be, it cannot be exercised unconditionally. It has to be done in a synodal manner. That's heresy.
Now, where then is the church today? Is it in pockets of resistance, as Bishop Williamson said? Is it even in Rome? Because Leo, when he came out on the balcony, he said, we want a synodal church, and he is continuing the Bergoglio synodality revolution. Where is the church, and where do you see things going under Leo moving forward if he continues to go down this path that he's going on?
Leo, for example, this on capital punishment, he has professed heresy. Whether or not he can be qualified clearly and unmistakably as a formal heretic, I don't think I can make that judgment yet, like I did with Bergoglio, because Bergoglio made it easy. Bergoglio made it very easy for us to make the judgment. Mm-hmm. He was so outlandish and so audacious in making his professions and assertions of heresy.
Mm-hmm. Leo did just issue this document urging inappropriate usage of co-redemptrix. Did you see that as an attack on Our Lady? How did you see that recent statement?
Yeah, and again, that would mean that Pope Pius XI was wrong. Pope St. Pius X was wrong. Mm-hmm. Who do these people think they are, that they can simply sweep under the rug pronouncements of previous popes, even if they were not ex cathedra pronouncements? They were statements of the highest authority. These are pronouncements of the supreme magisterium of the church, and they're just dismissing them out of hand. That certainly makes Leo highly suspect of heresy. Mm-hmm. And that is why I have said that because of the degree of suspicion of heresy with Leo, he's a doubtful pope. Mm. And as I have clearly set forth what is the church's canonical doctrine on suspected heretics, what is the church's doctrine regarding doubtful popes because of they're suspected of heresy. A doubtful pope can fall under the judgment of the church. A true and indubitably valid pope cannot fall under the judgment of the church. The church cannot judge such a one. But as St. Robert Bellarmine says, and this is not his personal opinion, this is the church's doctrine. This is the jurisprudence of the Roman Church. This is the canonical doctrine of the Roman Church, that a doubtful pope is not the same as a true and certain pope. That a doubtful pope does fall under the jurisdiction to be judged by the church, and this was more recently explained by Pope Gregory XVI in a book that he wrote while he was still a cardinal, but he republished it as pope, and he quoted the highest authorities, Ballerini and Bellarmine. Again, he was Pope Gregory XVI was not spouting his own personal opinions in that matter. He wrote very clearly and very with great erudition on this point, and he was in total agreement with Ballerini and Bellarmine on that point. And clearly, since the 1917 Code of Canon Law, makes it absolutely clear that any heretic, no matter what position he holds in the church, if he is a public heretic, if he defects from the faith publicly, he loses office automatically. And that is founded on the clear and unmistakable teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas. Bellarmine quoted St. Thomas Aquinas on that point. That's in the Code of Canon Law. So these so-called five opinions, when Bellarmine outlined the five opinions, you have people today who do not understand. Since they are called opinions, they're saying, well, it's just a matter of opinion. Well, no, it's not a matter of opinion. This is settled. It is in our time, it is settled doctrine. It was actually a settled doctrine after the First Vatican Council. Settled doctrine. But in Bellarmine's day, it was not so clearly defined. So he presented the five opinions, and for example, he will tell you which opinions verge on heresy, which are proximate to heresy, which opinions. He will tell you which opinions are heresy, which ones are proximate to faith. So we're not strictly speaking matters of opinion, just because we're listing these different opinions, because these are people who disagree on points of doctrine, that they're called opinions. But that doesn't mean the question is a matter of opinion. That is still an open question. It's not an open question.
What do you advise people to do, Father? Last question for you today. Again, thanks for being here. In these years ahead, is it to do the First Friday for Saturday devotions, daily rosary? Bishop Williamson was big on saying 15 decades a day.
15 decades of the rosary, the first Saturdays, for example. And I think it was Padre Pio. What did he say? Pray, hope, and don't worry.
Sounds good advice to me.
Prayer is the ultimate weapon.
Amen. Well, if you could say a mass for us and our viewers, that'd be, I'm sure, greatly appreciated. Everyone loves you here that watch this show, and please keep up the great work, and we look forward to your next book.
Definitely. I'll keep you working my mass intentions, and you can count on that.
Well, thank you so much, Father, for being here. Again, Father Paul Kramer, everybody, get his books on Amazon. I'll put the links in the show notes today. Thanks, everybody, for watching, and God bless.